Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. Today's video is going to be college football related. So if you're a college football fan, I think you'll enjoy this video. And if you're a college football fan, please go back and watch yesterday's video where I did my weekly top 10, and this week it was top 10 all-time sports mascots, and there was some college football teams on there, but it was not all college football teams. But before I get into today's topic, let me go ahead and say that recently a friend of mine got married, and the wedding was so beautiful. Everyone cried. Even the cake was in tears. And that is your dad joke of the day. I wanted to go ahead and put that out there so we can go ahead and get down to business about today's topic. I mentioned, I believe, in Saturday's video that I was going to get back on here one day this week and talk about this, and today is the day. If you have any thoughts on Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC, please let me know. I'm going to sit here and try to explain why I think it's a horrible, terrible, awful, pathetic idea. But unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it, because I know it's all about the money. And if you're not up to date, Texas and Oklahoma last week came out and said they were leaving the Big 12 to go to the SEC. Now, if you do not know the complete story, was they originally tried to go to the Big 10. But the Big 10 said they wanted Texas, but they had no desire to have Oklahoma, even though Oklahoma is by far the better football team. And the reason is the Big 10 is honestly, really, truly, probably the only conference in America with the only programs in America that still care about academics. And Oklahoma does not meet the AAU standards. And if you're not familiar with that, AAU, it is strictly all about academics, where your university has to have a certain level of education, and Oklahoma does not meet that. So the Big Ten said they did not want Oklahoma, but they wanted Texas. But Oklahoma and Texas are pretty much basically a package deal. You know, wherever they go, they're going to go together, so they can hopefully continue their long-standing rivalry that they've had for so many years. I think both teams know that they won't make it in a conference by themselves without the other team. So they're a package deal. So they were originally going to go to the Big Ten, and the Big Ten only wanted Texas, so they're not going. So it looks like they're going to go to the SEC. They have not yet said when it will happen, but it's probably more than likely going to be around 2025 or 2026, which is the same time the playoff is going to expand to 12 teams. So now it makes sense why the SEC Commissioner Sankey was wanting the 12-team playoff, because he's been having discussions with Oklahoma and Texas. And, of course, he thinks he'll get 7 or 8 teams into the playoffs, and the SEC will bring in all that money, which, first of all, cannot happen, because when all your teams play each other, somebody has to lose. And the team that loses, or the teams that lose, will not make the playoffs. So that cannot happen. But I hate it, because it's turning college football basically into the NFL minor league system. As a matter of fact, there's even a high school kid right now that says he's going to try to forego his high school senior year and go ahead and enroll at college and go ahead and start getting his NIL, which I hate, because if you follow college football, you know that there are many times and many occasions where mainly quarterbacks, but other positions as well, where these kids come out of high school and they look like 5-star, 5-tool players, and they get to college and they just never pan out. So this guy is going to forego his high school senior year and go ahead and enroll in college and start getting his name, image, likeness, and he's going to make $1 million, and he may not be worth a darn. So all these different kinds of customer service agencies and businesses are going to fork out all this money to this guy, and they're not going to get their return investment because he may not be any good. So I hate it. If this happens, then this is where the federal government needs to step in and say high school kids have to finish high school. There's just no reason for that not to happen. I hate it, but there's nothing we can do about it except sit back and watch it happen. Now, the SEC has not yet said what they're going to do when they go to a 16-team league. There was a rumor originally that they were going to have the pod system, and the pod system is just a terrible, horrible, awful idea. I hope it doesn't happen. Basically, they're going to have 16 teams, 4 pods, and you're going to have 4 teams in each pod, and you'll play each team in your pod, and then you'll play 2 teams out of the 4 teams in the 3 remaining pods. So you will have 9 conference games a year instead of 8, but it's not even. I was looking at it, and the pod Georgia is supposed to be in, they're in there with Florida and Kentucky and South Carolina, and they would get better competition from playing Central Florida and South Florida and Memphis than playing Florida and Kentucky and South Carolina. So it's just not even. It's too convoluted anyway and too confusing. The best thing to do is just keep the Alabama-Mississippi line as the breaking point of the conferences and move Alabama and Auburn over to the east and put Oklahoma and Texas in the west, and then go from 8 conference games to 9 conference games, and you'll play the other 7 teams in your side of the division, and you'll play 2 in the opposite side of the division. But now you'll have to do away with the year in, year out rivalry, which to me is good, because like if you look at Georgia and Auburn, you know, they've been rivals forever. So that's a good idea. That's a great idea. But South Carolina and Texas A&M play every year, and there is no direct correlation for that rivalry. It makes absolutely 0 sense. So I think it's a good thing to do away with that anyway. I hate to see the Georgia-Auburn rivalry die. Of course, it won't die. You'll still play them. You just won't play them every year. But some of those year-in, year-out rivalry games from the opposite side of the division in the conference just don't make any sense at all. But I think the whole thing is a bad idea, just because you're going to be doing away with the pageantry and the rivalries and traditions, and it's going to be all about money. But what's funny, though, is I remember when Missouri left the Big 12 and jumped to the SEC, all the Georgia friends I have were like, Missouri's so stupid. They couldn't even compete in the Big 12. Why are they going to come to the SEC? And then they come to the SEC, and then they win the East 2 years in a row, and all that stuff died down. Now, if you look at Oklahoma in their program history, if I'm not mistaken, their career record against the SEC is 191 and 91, or 191 and 90, or 190 and 191, something like that. Anyway, they win more than 66% of their games against the SEC. But yet the SEC says Oklahoma's no good. You know, the Big 12 sucks. They don't play defense. Now all of a sudden, Oklahoma will jump to the SEC, and all of a sudden beating Oklahoma will be, that's a big game. Oklahoma's a great team. But when they were in the Big 12, they were overrated. So to me, that's just funny. But I do think it's going to make it better as far as the games, you know, because who wants to see, you know, a top 5 team play a pitiful team every week? You know, you don't want to see that. So I do think Oklahoma and Texas coming to the SEC is going to make the games better. But I just hate it because in 10 years, we may still have college football, but it will not be NCAA college football. It'll be completely, totally different than what we see right now. Like I said, there'll be no more pageantry, no more traditions, no more of the good rivalries. All that stuff is going to be out the window for the money. But now they've been saying for years that the NCAA is either slowly going to go away or that the big time teams are going to form 5 major Power 5 conferences, and that would be a total of 80 teams, and then they would have their own separate entity, whatever it would be called, and then the rest of the teams would still be a part of the NCAA. So you would have basically 2 national championships. You would have one with all the big time programs, and then you'd have one with the remaining programs, which would be good in a way because you would get to see, some of the smaller teams actually win a national championship. So this could be the beginning of that. It wouldn't surprise me because they've been saying it for years, just like they've been saying for years that the players were going to eventually start getting paid. And the NCAA sat back and did nothing about it and just let it happen. And now that it's happened, all of a sudden Mark Emmert's like, oh no, this is a bad idea. We've got to stop this. When he had all that time and all those years to stop it, and he made no effort and he made no attempt to stop it. So being that this has also been floating around the rumor mill for years, it's probably going to happen. This is probably the beginning of that happening. But now, if you haven't heard, not the SEC commissioner, the Big 12 commissioner, yesterday sent out a cease and desist letter to ESPN. Now, the rumor started coming out yesterday, and the letter came out yesterday, but he may have actually sent this letter earlier in the week. But he sent out a cease and desist letter because he is upset, because he thinks, and I think he's right, but he thinks that ESPN is openly trying to make these teams leave, their conference, whatever conference they're in, and go into the SEC. So he thinks that ESPN has been behind the whole thing about Oklahoma and Texas, and it would not surprise me because, like I said a couple of weeks ago, if you've been following the channel, you may have watched the video, but ESPN to me is a propaganda network. It's a bunch of hogwash. It's a bunch of nonsense. I won't watch it unless there's a game on. I'll still watch the games, but I no longer watch any program that comes on ESPN because ESPN used to be really good, but now it's turned into a propaganda network where they no longer tell you the truth. They no longer tell you the entire story. They tell you what they want you to believe and try to brainwash you and to make you think that what they're saying is true. And if you actually sit back and read about it, you realize they're only telling you half stories. So since it's become a propaganda network, their ratings have been declining and they've been losing money. So I do think that is actually true, and I think that Bowlesby has, some merit behind what he's saying because, the SEC CBS contract runs out here in a couple of years, and ESPN is going to fork out a bunch of money for the new SEC deal. So, of course, ESPN is going to want every big-time team they can get to get in the SEC so that when they start carrying all their games here in a few years, they'll have every big-time team in that conference. So I think there's some merit behind what he's saying. I think he's right. But at the same time, I don't really know if he can make ESPN go away. But I do think there's some merit behind what he's saying. So we'll have to sit back and wait and see where this goes since Bowlesby sent out his ESPN cease and desist letter. I think that's very, very interesting. But like I said, they have not said yet when all this will happen. And just like the video I made a couple of months ago about the college football playoff expanding, it has, some good things and some bad things. Well, this is kind of the same way. The SEC expanding and making the on-the-field product better and making the games better is good, but it is bad if you like college football for what you see on the field. because now it's going to be all about the money. And I think it's funny that people look at the ACC outside of the 1 year in 2013 when Florida State had 18 of their 22 players go in the NFL first round. Outside of that year, the ACC for the last decade has been Clemson and everybody else. But yet everybody talks about how that conference is Clemson and everybody else. But if you look at the SEC, outside of 2019, when LSU had probably the best team ever put on a football field, the SEC for the last decade has been Alabama and everybody else. But yet they'll talk about how Clemson dominates the ACC, but nobody will talk about how Alabama dominates the SEC. So hopefully Oklahoma and Texas coming in will make the competition better, and Alabama will no longer dominate. Of course, I think they're going to dominate not every year, but almost every year as long as Nick Saban is their coach. But I would like to see Alabama and Auburn go over to the East. It makes more sense anyway. I mean, they're a whole lot closer to the East than Missouri is. So it would make more sense to put Alabama and Auburn in the East anyway, and put Oklahoma and Texas in the West, and then just do away with the year-in, year-out rivalries and play all 7 teams in your side of the conference, and then rotate, the 2 teams from the other side year in, year out, and start playing 9 conference games. That would be the best and the easiest and the most non-convoluted thing they can do. But I just hate it because I want college football to be about the players playing for the love of the game, not playing for the love of the money. And it makes no sense to me, because I thought you played the game to win. But apparently it's no longer that way. Apparently now you play the game to get money, which, money does your school good, but you don't hang banners over your stadium because your school brought in a certain amount of money. You hang banners over your stadium because you won championships. So apparently all the other schools in the conference are getting tired of Alabama being the only team that gets to hang a banner up every year for winning national championships. So they're hoping that Oklahoma and Texas coming in is going to help other teams win national championships. Now, what I think you'll see the Big 12 do, and it's just my opinion, I don't know this, but, the Big 12 lost 2 teams a few years back, and it's been only 10 teams. Well, now with Oklahoma and Texas leaving, they're down to 8 teams. So if they don't find some teams, I ain't going to say quickly, because as of right now, they still have Oklahoma and Texas. But if they don't go ahead and start looking for some teams to replace Oklahoma and Texas, the Big 12 won't last, because the only Big 12 school that'll be left that's any good at football is Iowa State. And they weren't any good until they got Matt Campbell, and I don't think Matt Campbell's going to stay there for a long period of time. And even though they're pretty good at baseball and they're pretty good at basketball, we know that when it comes to collegiate athletics, that college football is where most of the money comes in at. So they're going to have to try to find some schools and some teams. So I think they'll go after Boise State, and I think they'll try to get BYU to become non-independent and join the Big 12. And I think they'll try to get Central Florida and Memphis, or Central Florida and South Florida, or South Florida and Memphis. And that way they'll be back to 12 teams, and they'll be able to still survive. Because if you've been following along, you know that when the 12-team playoff does start, the Big 12 will have an automatic bid if it's still around. It does not have an automatic bid now, but it will once it goes to 12 teams. So in order to keep that bid, they'll have to go ahead and stick around and find some teams, because with only 8 teams in the conference, that's not going to make it. So I think since Boise State is pretty much good every year, they'll try to get Boise State. And BYU, they're not great, but BYU is usually consistently a 7 to 8 win team. So I think they'll try to get BYU, and they'll try to get Central Florida and Memphis, or Central Florida and South Florida. That way they're getting teams that are consistently good every single year, so that if by some chance and whenever Matt Campbell leaves Iowa State, they'll have somebody in the conference generating money for college football. TCU had a few good years, but these last few years TCU's been average. And Texas Tech was good when Mike Leach was there, but ever since Mike Leach left, they've been average. So you take away Iowa State, without Oklahoma and Texas, there is nobody in that conference generating money. I know Oklahoma State, ever since Mike Gundy's been their coach, they're generally an 8-win team, but Oklahoma State, nobody cares about them. Even their own fans don't care about them. So if Oklahoma leaves, whenever they leave, and they go to the SEC, and the Oklahoma State rivalry, I'm not going to say it dies, because they'll still play non-conference, on occasion, but it won't be an every year thing. That's just another rivalry game that'll go by the wayside when Oklahoma and Texas join the SEC. But when Oklahoma and Oklahoma State no longer play every year, there'll be nobody that watches Oklahoma State. The only folks that care about them are people that went to school there and they hate Oklahoma. But if you're not playing them, then it doesn't matter. Plus, whenever Mike Gundy does leave, I don't think they'll be an 8 or 9 win team. They'll go back to being a 5 or 6 win team, and Mike Gundy won't be there forever. So just like back when we had our discussion about the 12-team playoff, this has its ups and its downs. I do think, like I said earlier, it's going to be good for the on-the-field product, for the game, during the game. But all the other stuff, it is absolutely destroying. College football is not just about the game or the games, however you want to put it, but it's also about, the rivalries and the tradition, and all those things are going to go away when this kind of thing starts happening, because you'll slowly but surely see other teams and other conferences start making moves. I don't know who, but more than likely if the SEC goes to 16 teams, you'll see the ACC go to 16 teams, which means they only have to add one team, because Notre Dame basically now is already in the ACC. They just only play 4 ACC teams a year. They'll pretty much just become a full-time ACC member, and then that'll be the 15th team, so they'll only have to add one more school to become 16 teams. But if the rumor is true that they're going to have 5 major conferences with 16 teams in each conference, the SEC would be there once they add Oklahoma and Texas, and the ACC would almost be there once Notre Dame becomes a full-time member. They're only going to have to find one more team, but the Pac-12 still got a long way to go, and the Big Ten still got a long way to go, and now the Big 12 will have a long way to go to get to 16 teams, but that would give us 80 teams, which I know 80 teams doesn't sound like a lot, because there's right at 130 teams right now in Division I college football, but 80 teams, honestly, to me, is too many, because you can look at those 80 teams and you can pretty much guarantee that at least half, if not more than half of those teams are not going to win a national championship. But it would be better to go ahead and get rid of, the rest of the teams. But I do think me and my friend Eric were talking a few weeks back about the name, image, likeness stuff, and him and I pretty much agree that, it's a good thing. And I've been thinking about it, for years, ever since the rumor started going around that this was going to happen. And it's a good thing, because even though college football should be about, playing with your heart, playing for the love of the game and not for the money, but, if you're a college football fan, if you've been to a game ever, no matter who your team is, no matter what game you went to, no matter where it was, if you went to that game, you went to support your team and those athletes. So if the school you pull for is making all kinds of money, sometimes millions of dollars for those players, the players should get something. Because if you go, you're not going to see the coach. You're not going to see the referees. You're going to see the players. So if you fork out money for those players, those players should benefit in some way, shape, or form. But there should be a limit on it. You've got Alabama's quarterback Bryce Young, who I think will lose a starting job by the middle of October. But this kid is a backup that is supposed to be their starting quarterback that's already making $1 million or right at it in all these name, image, likeness stuff, and he ain't even playing. So I do think they should get paid something, but I do think there should be a limit on how much you can make. Because otherwise, what's going to happen, and this is probably going to happen eventually somewhere down the road anyway, but all these programs and all these schools are only allowed 80 scholarships. So what's going to happen is if you start paying these players, more than likely in about 10, 11, 12 years, you're going to go from 80 scholarships down to probably 60 or 65. So what's going to happen is a lot of these other, lesser known sports like, say, volleyball, or some schools that have soccer, some schools that have tennis, some of those sports are going to go away because you're paying all your money for these athletes for baseball, basketball, and football. So a lot of these kids now that are coming up through high school that want to go to college to play a sport that's not baseball, basketball, or football won't be able to because all those lesser known sports are going to eventually go away. Like Iowa. Iowa has the best wrestling team in America. They're top 2 or 3 in wrestling every single year, and they've won multiple national championships. But I'll say within 10 years, Iowa's wrestling program will be gone. And all that money Iowa makes right now in wrestling will be gone. But when you start paying these players, your scholarship numbers are going to have to go down because you're not going to be able to get all these extra scholarships when you're forking out all the extra money for the name, image, likeness stuff. So if you know somebody that that plays a sport, whether it's in middle school or in high school, if it's not baseball, basketball, or football, and you know that person and you want them to be successful with whatever sport they're playing, by the time they get to college, that sport may be gone because these scholarship numbers are going to start dwindling down because you don't have a choice. You're not going to be able to pay all these guys name, image, likeness every single year. So I do think they should get something because if we pay our money to see them, it's like a movie star. If you pay your money and you buy a ticket to watch a movie, when you go to watch that movie star gets a cut of the tickets you bought. So it should be the same way in athletics. You buy the ticket to go watch the game, the athletes should get a cut of that ticket. Maybe not the whole ticket, but a cut of it. So they should get something, but there should be a limit. They should only be allowed to get a certain amount of money. You've got Auburn's quarterback now, Bo Nix, is the spokesman for Milo's Tea. And I'm not quite sure, how much money he's getting on that. But Bo Nix is an average at best quarterback. So just think about if he's getting all that money from Milo's Tea, think about how much he'd be getting if he was, great, or if he was coming out of high school and he was supposed to be great. So they should get something, but there should be a limit on it. So maybe in the next couple of years when this stuff finally takes off, we'll see somebody. It's not going to be Mark Emmert. You can forget that. But maybe we'll see somebody step in and say, hey, you guys are going to get your cut, but you're only going to make, a certain amount. Because I was listening to the radio last week, and if you follow college football, you know that all these conferences now and all these teams are having, media days, media weeks, whatever. And I was listening to the radio last week on the way to work, and there was a player, and I won't say his name or say his team, but he was on the radio being interviewed, and he was talking about the name, image, likeness thing, and, he pretty much said, it's a good thing, but I'm not going to be one of these athletes that's going to tell you I'm getting mistreated because I just got to fly on a plane to come to media days, and they paid for it when I could have gotten my car and drove there in 2 hours, and they're feeding me free food. So I'm not going to be one of those athletes that's going to say, oh, feel bad for me, I'm getting so mistreated. I'm not. As long as I get my scholarship and I get to play, I'm happy. And that's the way it should be everywhere, but I know it's not going to be that way. And I understand the athletes, wanting to cut because they're going out there and putting their bodies on the line. But I do agree with my man Eric that there should be some kind of a limit on how much you can get. It only makes sense because, if you're good and you're as good as you're supposed to be, when you get to the NFL, you're going to make more anyway. So if you have any thoughts on anything we've talked about over the last 30 minutes when it comes to Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC, still don't know when, but it is going to happen. When the rumor first started, I didn't want to do a video about it right away, and the only reason was not every year, but it seems like about every 3 or 4 years you start hearing rumors about this team's going to leave this conference and go here. And every time it happens, people, get all excited and start talking about it, and then you find out a week or so later that it was all a hoax. So when this came out, I was like, well, I'll wait. I even said on here, I think it was last Thursday when I brought it up the first time, that, there was some rumors going around and I would wait to see what happened. And it's been a week now, and apparently it's true. It's going to happen. We just don't know yet, when it's going to happen. There was also some rumors going around that Clemson was going to go to the SEC, which is not going to happen. And there was also a rumor going around that Ohio State and Michigan were going to go to the SEC, which is not going to happen. Ohio State's going to continue to be the top of the heap in the Big Ten, and Clemson will keep being top of the heap in the ACC. I know a lot of people will want to see it happen because you think Clemson and Georgia could start playing, every single year. And the more conference games you play, the less chance you have of playing, big-time teams, non-conference. But with the ACC network starting, and I believe the original contract they signed, I think, goes through 2030 or 2035. And if you leave the ACC before that contract runs out, you have to pay the conference just a buku of money. So Clemson would go in debt and go in the hole if they left to go to the SEC. So that's not happening, but that was a rumor. But every single time you start hearing the rumors about teams leaving this conference and going there, it seems like every time that happens, you hear that Clemson is leaving the ACC to go to the SEC, but that's not happening. And Ohio State and Michigan are not, because they're just like Oklahoma and Texas. They're a package. If one goes, they're both going to go. And Michigan needs to get their program right and start winning again before they even think about going to play anywhere else. They couldn't even hardly compete right now in the AAC, let alone any other conference. So they need to worry about getting themselves fixed before they worry about going to another conference. But please feel free to leave me your thoughts and comments on what you think about Oklahoma and Texas, because like I said, it does have, some good parts about it, because, you'll have less and less games, especially if you're on the West. If you're in the East, you still have, South Carolina and Kentucky and Vanderbilt and all those pathetic excuses for football teams. But in the West, you're basically going to have all the good teams in the conference except for Alabama and Georgia. They'll definitely be the two best teams in the East. But the West will still have LSU. And if Mike Leach is still at Mississippi State, by 2025, they'll be a top 15 team. And you're going to have Oklahoma, and you're going to have Texas. And Texas A&M, even though Jimbo Fisher is overrated, they still come out ranked in top 20 every year, even though they're not a top 20 team. So, if you're in the West, or if you're a fan of a team in the West, it's going to make the games so much better. I know you're going to lose more, and nobody wants to lose. But, would you rather be ranked third and play a 1-7 team, or would you rather be ranked third and play a 7-1 team? So it is going to make the competition on the field better, but I just hate that it just destroys college football for the pageantry and the rivalries and traditions, and makes it all about seeing how much money your school can bring in on a year-in, year-out basis. So feel free to leave me your thoughts, leave me your comments. I know I said I would talk about this one day this week, and I figured I would make Thursday be the day. And coming up here in the next couple of days, I'm going to do something I have not done yet, except for, with the exception of the Cincinnati Bengals, and that was just to show my man Chris, who is a Bengals fan, that I would talk about his team. But I have not yet done any NFL team schedules. So if you're an NFL fan and you have a team, please feel free to let me know, and I'll cover your team. Otherwise, I'll do the teams that I know people care about. So I'll do the Falcons, and I'll do the Panthers, and then for my buddy Chris from work, I'll do the Dolphins. But outside of those three teams, I don't really want to talk about anybody else unless anybody wants to talk about them. So until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of three. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.